Megan?
Here.
Okay. Myself, I'm present. Christy? Carl?
I'm here. This is Carl. Present.
Kate?
Here.
And Andrew.
This is Christy. I'm here also. Sorry, I can unmute.
All right, so only Andrea is not present.
All right, great. Nobody else gonna have online. There are. Let me see. 3, 5, 8, 9, 10, 11, and then a couple of us, so 12, 13. Great. Thank you. Great. Okay, let's go ahead and look at the agenda slide, please. We can start off with approval of minutes. Approval of minutes did get sent out fairly late this time, and I apologize for that. It's a busy time. Are there any comments or questions regarding minutes from last meeting? Okay. Sorry, I'm blank for a second. It's 5 o'clock, y'all. Yeah, can we a motion to approve the meeting minutes from November?
Sorry, I just had one, I apologize, I'm trying to pull them up and refresh my memory. Did it mention anything about the fish tracking thing? Can we, like, I know that came up briefly. It did,
Yeah.
okay.
Exactly covered that. Cool.
Yeah, we did,
Thank
a brief, conversation of what's on the minutes in terms of fish tracking. Maybe just have a little back on noise. So we captured the question that came up and about whether it was the fish tracking study would have affected fish advisory. A little bit of response from that by OHA. We got the recorded a request from this board to if we would bring USGS in to talk about the fish tracking study.
Cool. Thank you.
And Andrea has joined. Oh, great. Welcome, Andrea.
Yeah, sorry, technical difficulties on my end in joining. Good evening, everybody.
No worries. Hey, Andrea, we're just talking about approval of November meeting minutes. Do you have any comments or questions on the minutes?
No, I'm good.
All right, is there a motion to approve the meeting minutes?
I'll motion to approve if I can, as co-chair.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's coaching. Is there a second?
I'll second. This is Andrea.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Hi.
Aye.
All right, the ayes have it. Moving right along, we don't have any old business currently, so we can jump right into new business. Do we have Amanda Krantz on the line? Yes. Amanda, could you give us a quick update on federal facility agreement negotiations?
Yep, sorry, it won't be really much of an update. We are still waiting on feedback on the budget sections from Army, the Department of Justice, and the Office of Management and Budget. And I believe we have a meeting to meet before a meeting scheduled before the holidays to discuss. Yes, we have one on Friday.
Yeah, I know this has definitely been a hot button issue. I think when we started off on these meetings, we were projecting that we'd have certainly like a viewable copy or maybe even a signed FFA by December, and obviously we're not there. This is unfortunately one of those things that we don't get a lot of control of at the core level. And so we are still just waiting on those high levels of the government to give us some feedback on what's gonna work for those provisions, and then we can kind of restart those conversations with EPA regulators. And start moving forward with that. So are there any comments or questions from board members?
Aside from the meeting scheduled on Friday, is there any sort of update on the potential timeline or future meetings to continue? To find a resolution?
Not that we're tracking at this level. I think unfortunately, many of the like really productive conversations are happening at levels that are above the district and the division.
Okay.
We definitely do expect to have more upcoming meetings between division, district, regulators. Any
I'm
other-
sorry. Oh, sorry. I was just double checking to make sure there wasn't a question there. I missed the tail end of
Yeah.
it. It sounds like there's no question. Then I'll go back on mute.
Any questions in the chat on FFA?
Just to clarify for folks who are listening, just to be sure, so. Aside from the budget, it looks like there's pretty much agreement on the other parts of the FFA, and it's just held up on the budget discussion.
Mhm.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, all right, if there's no other comments or questions, we can move right along. To proceed to the next slide, please. So we, for a little while, have been looking to add some additional members to the rep. We did get a couple applications and those went out before the meeting today for folks to go ahead and review. As I was going through our operating procedures, I also noted that we don't have any particular procedures on adding new members to the rep. All the procedures that are in place are referring to before the RAB exists, how we add folks in. I doubt we would want to go down the route of having a full other board find nominees and vote for us, so. Had some suggested language put together for folks to review. As far as like what kind of regulations we have from the board, it's very open on what the RAB can do. The RAB has a lot of latitude to decide how they nominate and vote members. And so it is very much open for at this point for any RAB members to have alternate thoughts, comments, questions on this. Basic concept in the suggested language is to have a small selection panel of RAB community members. It can be all community members or some of them. And the idea would be that that selection panel would nominate applicants and the community members could vote.
I like this idea. I don't think it needs to be the whole board reviewing it. My thought is maybe the co-chairs review the applications and present for nomination.
I
Is
would,
that?
as the core member, I don't think it would be appropriate for me to nominate community members. It's really for the community members to decide who you want to have next to you.
Makes sense.
Alternatively, it could be yourself as a community co-chair or that role, and then another community member if folks wanted to keep it somewhat small. Any other thoughts or ideas from RAB members?
Why at lunch today?
I mean, like I said, it's 5 o'clock. This is, something that we didn't talk about last time, right? So, folks got the slides, but other than that, you didn't have the last month to think about what this might look like. We can, if folks would rather, we can table this for a future round. I would say we would wanna have a decision on what voting procedures should look like before we vote members in. But we also have 2 applications in front of us, so.
Mhm.
What's the ideal number of members? Was it 12
An ideal, for the board
for
itself.
the board? Yes.
Our voting procedures actually do not, detail a particular number. You want it somewhat big enough so that it's representative of the community, but there's a lot of community members here. So it could be, quite a bit bigger than it is now. It could be a little bit smaller.
If it's helpful, Jordan, I mean, I've seen up to 25,
Oh, geez.
yeah, on a cab or a RAV, so, it's dependent on you all, really, what works for you.
Yeah, I've typically seen RAB smaller than
Mhm.
community advisory boards, because usually it's the federal facilities tend to fly under the radar at the time, so. But I've seen, I think the largest one I've ever sat on was probably a dozen people.
I mean, this looks good to me, as far as the process moving forward. I'm happy with that.
Yeah, I agree. I think the biggest thing, just that selection panel, who would that be
Yeah.
consist of?
And I mean, like, yeah, honestly, there's like only 6 of us total right now,
Sure.
so it's a pretty small group. So, yeah.
Andrea has a question.
Yeah, Andrea, please go ahead.
Oh, I just had a comment and actually I believe it was already kind of just said is that we have a pretty small group, so I don't know that we need to really, we don't know, I don't see that we necessarily have to break it down too much more. And as far as the total number, I guess I just feel, it would be good to try and get enough people on that if people need to drop off for whatever reason, we're not down to just, a hand, just a couple. That's pretty much my only comments.
You don't necessarily have to name the selection panel now. It could be on an as-needed basis,
Mhm.
right? You get a couple of applications and you reach out to them and say, hey, who wants to be on the selection panel? And then get a number of people from that, just as needed. Could do that.
Yeah, I agree, that may be more applicable if we had a larger group too in the future, so I think it's good to have as part of the procedure.
Would members want to see a line added along the lines of the selection panel consists of whatever members volunteer? Something along those lines, so it's clear that it doesn't have to be a minimum or.
Yeah, I think that's fine, because it has to be approved by a majority vote anyway, so that sounds good.
Megan, it's John. Can you hear me?
Yep, go ahead, John.
Yeah. Hey, Megan. Hey, so the rules were written initially for the voting members or just the membership for members and the selection committee for the initial, but we left it open so that, and we didn't include, follow on membership. We wanted the RAB to do that, and decide who their members should come from the community group. So it was left open initially. And so it really is up to the membership to decide how, we want to decide who's on the membership and how we want to approach that. And that was written for that rule, and for the reason is because it is community led and it will grow and change. But it let the members the RAB members choose how it will grow and change.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, so we have some options at this point. The suggested language could be tweaked a little bit, to add some information about what the selection panel looks like in terms of just a group of whoever volunteers. If you're satisfied with as it's written, someone could put a motion to vote for it, or even a motion to change it. This one's definitely very much up to the community members.
I want to point out one thing that the RAB members should keep in mind, which is the current terms are for 2 years, which means based on the existing board membership, you would have 6 members retiring at the same time. You need more continuity to address transitions. So you might want to include as part of your voting in new members, expanding and enabling additional terms so you don't have a block of participants migrating off at the same time.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
It just means that you might want to include language like members may volunteer for, an additional 6 months or a year of service in order to stagger terms.
Katie, how did you word that? The selection panel? Creating it. I forgot how you worded it.
Was it my words or did you say it? Just about the, I was just saying, making the point that there's only 6 of us right now, but in the future that the selection panel might be more applicable. But I think we talked about it just being like whoever volunteers for is that what you're referring to?
Yeah.
So you're looking to add some more language.
What, yeah, I mean, I guess if it's needed, language as to how that selection panel itself is selected.
Mhm. Yeah, it should be, like, we should have maybe a minimum number, because we don't want just like one person who volunteers, then like carrying the weight of all the work.
Mhm. Any initial thoughts on what would be ideal for minimum number?
I'd say like probably 3.
I was gonna say 3 too, yeah.
Okay.
You could say, applicants will be placed in a nomination by the, I guess, selected, number of members. By the volunteer selection panel with at least 3 RAD members.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
Okay.
By a volunteer selection panel, that way it's not the, it's just,
Yeah.
it's a, so it's more of an
Could
ad hoc
rotate.
than it is
Mhm.
set, so by a volunteer selection panel comprised of at least 3.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Leave it to EPA to be able to massage text.
Yeah.
Katie, do you have that line marked down for minutes? Yes. Okay. So we want to have a motion to make that alteration in this language.
I don't know.
All right, we have a motion. Is there a second?
Second, Christie.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, that's big for everyone.
What do you think?
Carl. Okay. Carl, I'll just check in with you real quick. Are you a yay or a nay to add that language into this text?
Aye.
All right, thanks, Carl. Okay, well, motion will pass. We have that specific line from, Rich. Thank you, Rich, for that wording. We have that recorded and we can enter the operating procedures. All right, if we're ready to move forward, we can talk a little more about recruitment. All right, next slide, please. So we currently have 4 seats, we can fill all, none more. We've had 2 applications, by folks who have, listened in or attended to RAB meetings. One of them is here with us today. Thank you for joining us, Mitch. It's great to see public interest always in this, in not only in this meeting, but in joining the RAB. So we really appreciate you being here. We did talk last time about going ahead and extending recruitment dates, and we can definitely do that. One point to discuss is when we want to set the next date for. Our next meetings are scheduled for January and February. I would assume we wouldn't want to go for January. That's not a lot of time, and it's right over a lot of different holidays. So the question would be, I guess, is February sound good, or do we want to push out a little more, give one more time?
I'm good with February.
That works for me as well.
All right. Any opposed to February?
Just want to clarify that we're gonna still move forward with reviewing the applications we've already received.
Yeah, great clarification. Yeah, we do still want to go ahead and, go over those applications, and, we should definitely talk before we leave the slide about when we want to do that.
Cool.
Right?
Yeah.
Real quick, while we're still talking about next round of recruitment though, for this particular round, we did buy some ads in newspapers. Is there a preference from the board about doing that again? I can't say how successful that was or wasn't.
Do you remember which papers it went in?
Yeah, we had, I mainly said yeah and then forgot. Portland Tribune, Columbia Gorge paper, I can't remember the exact name. And then 4 different tribal papers as well. I want to say Yakimas, Umatillas, I want to say Cowlitz, and I can't remember the third, but I can always follow up with that, or we can have it as a post note in the meeting minutes as well.
So what do you think with you know more, do you think like a radio spot would be more effective? Do you think newspaper ads are good for folks?
Mitch, how did you hear about it?
I just happened to remember the Bradford Island cleanup thing and got the internet. There it was.
Stroke a lot.
Just so happened to be it was the day before I typed it in, so that's how I got to it.
Yeah, I honestly don't know.
Yeah.
We'll certainly try to execute more on the social media side of things. We didn't get a lot of responses.
Yeah.
You know, it's really just, do the people managing those accounts respond to that or not? But of course, I'm gonna try that again because it's free and it's out there and a lot of people see social media.
I mean, I think I would support another round of putting it in the papers, particularly in the tribal papers, just to, I think sometimes repetition, and if somebody misses it once, it's good to at least put it out twice. So I think I would support that. Yeah. Also, I'm open to other cool ideas to get people excited about the route.
Yeah, and I know it's probably the most expensive route, but radio, a lot of people in the gorge commute for work. And probably spend a lot of time listening to the radio. I mean, I live in Gresham, work here, so.
Yeah, like maybe a radio spot might be.
But then selecting which of the 90 radio stations you put it on.
Yeah.
Yeah, let me put that away and look into that.
I'd say NPR, that's just people who listen to NPR tend to do these things, but. maybe not.
Any other members have specific thoughts on, papers, as like a yay or nay, you think it's worthwhile or you don't?
There's the Skamania Pioneer, it's a small little independent newspaper out of Stevenson across the river.
Oh, this is Christy. I know we changed the format of we used to have a newspaper that we printed, now it's digital. I know we're kind of changing over our technology right now as well. And I work for ERWM and I don't even think our website's up right now. So, but I will find out what is working right now. And so I can get out and if you send the information to me, I can put that in our digital paper right now.
Sure, that'd be great, thank you.
And I wonder if like, I don't know, Chamber of Commerce, if there's any like places just to keep spreading the word, you know, things like that where people might go to.
I think, it was either Cascade Locksters Skamania, Chamber of Commerce, or one of the few folks that did respond positively, they would post.
Mhm.
I'll hit them all again.
Cool.
I've got all their numbers now.
They're on the list.
I'm speaking with my people, we'll get with our press office and
Yeah.
help facilitate that, and it'd be a resource as well, so. I know it's listed here, but yeah, we have a pretty robust press office. So.
We just recorded a podcast where we mentioned it as well. But we're
Nice.
looking for those.
Okay, so it sounds like the preference is to aim for February as the next opportunity to receive applications and go over those. There is a desire still to go ahead to some newspapers, including Skamania Pioneer, which we had not reached out to. And we'll also look into radio ads for that. And yeah, I'll let you know what I find out about that. Cool, thank you. All right, great. And then I don't want to leave this slide before talking. You do have 2 applications ready to go. 2 folks who have been very engaged as of putting in their applications or even before. So I think the last note on this slide is really talking about when we want to have that selection panel come together.
I think sooner would be better.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, it was great that you sent the applications out ahead of time. They're not extensive. I think most people might have already reviewed them.
Yeah.
Possibly.
Yeah.
So I would say we should be able to put together a small, I mean, I'm happy to be on the selection committee for this round. I don't think it's too heavy of a lift.
I see Andrea's hand up.
I was just gonna say if perhaps we could, if people are willing to volunteer now, or we do, if Mega can send out an email seeking volunteers this week, and then maybe a doodle poll or something similar to try and find just I agree, it probably should not take that long to review. I looked them over and they're not, yeah, they're pretty short. So maybe we can just set something up here, maybe not necessarily before the holiday or shortly thereafter, just depending on people's schedules, but try and get that organized here in the next week.
Yeah, I agree, and I think we could even go so far as to skip the selection panel on this round, because we have the 2 applications. I think we could potentially agree to move it to a discussion with the round numbers, with the goal of having a vote.
Yeah. I will make another quick note. I did notice on one of the, I can't remember which one it was, but on one of them, it looked like, one of the answers that was filled out was cut off in
Mhm.
what I got.
Yeah, we did have, some technical issues with that, PDF that I didn't even realize until we got back the answers. So we do have to work that for the next round. I can follow up with those folks to make sure I get full information from them. And I can, email that out separately, if
Yeah,
that works.
that'd be great.
Okay.
Yeah, that would work.
So Kate, do you want to make an actual motion on that?
Yeah, I'd like to make that motion that we forego the selection committee on this round and schedule a discussion with RAB members, whether that's email or a Zoom call, with the goal of taking a vote.
Okay. Now, as a board co-chair, I obviously wouldn't be participating in the selection panel itself, but would you like me to facilitate the actual scheduling of that call?
I think that'd be very helpful.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay, I will do that.
And I'll second that motion.
All right, great. Let's go ahead and do a roll call vote, please, on this one. Christie? Christie, did you leave? All right, I'll loop back to Christie. Carl?
Sorry.
Go ahead, Christie.
Yes,
Thank you.
sorry.
All right, I'm not hearing Carl. I'll loop back to him as well. Andrea?
Oh, yeah, I'm a yeah. I wasn't sure if you were done or not, but I'm yes.
Thanks, Carl.
Andrea's a yes too.
All right, great. All right, motion passes. I will be in touch with, I'll send out a doodle poll for folks to discuss their availability. And then y'all can go from there. All right, great. I'm gonna take a quick note on that.
Andrea, I see you have your hand raised. Do you have a comment as well?
No, sorry, I just forgot to put it down. I'm on my phone tonight, which I'm rare. I never do Zoom on my phone, so it's like really it's crazy. Can't find anything.
All right, all right, we spent a decent amount of time on, talking RAB membership. We do have this technical presentation I want to get to. Any other questions, comments on RAB membership before we move on? All right. All right, moving on to the next slide. We talked last time about wanting to have a particular date be established to check in on the interim co-chair, community co-chair assignment, so that we're not kind of like keeping Jordan in this role longer than he wants to be. So this is a new topic. Jordan, I think people will probably be looking to you on what you feel like a good date is, but I'm of course open always to other RAB members giving their thoughts on that. So the question put to the board is basically, when do you want to take another look at this assignment and revisit possibly changing community co-chair?
I have no problem doing it as long as needed. I think my thought was, once we get these 4 empty seats filled, then redo that vote.
Those are my thoughts too, yeah.
Yeah. If it goes, for some reason, takes till July, then so be it. I mean,
You want
Try not to be too hard on
That's July 2025, right?
yeah. Well, my turn's over by then, so yeah.
All right, do you want to throw out a quick motion on that?
Sure, motion to stay as the community co-chair, until we reach 10 members, is that what we at?
Yeah, that would be 10 members,
10
yeah.
10 members. Before we vote again.
Second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right.
Aye.
Thank you all. That was a quickly passed motion. I appreciate it so much. All right.
I will note you successfully misspelled my name twice.
Oh, geez.
O-N and 2 T's.
As a person who's chronically getting their name misspelled, I am gonna make a note of that and get that right next time. All right, let's go ahead and move on to the next slide. I believe we go right into project status. I'm gonna try to be brief so we can give lots of time to talking about this phase 1 river work plan. So quick status on the project side. We do have a fully signed memorandum of understanding with the Cowlitz. I do understand other tribes have been contacted about their interest. I'm not aware of any others that have contacted back to express their interest. So right now we have those fully signed memoranda with both Cowlitz and Yakima. We have a new contractor that's been on board since, I believe it was late September, we awarded that. Some of the work that we got going on with them, we have them looking at work plans for the upland operable unit, as well as that second phase of the river. So we won't hear about either of those today. It'll be focused on this initial phase 1. We have some sort of limitations with our contract with Bryce. And so things that we cannot cover with Bryce, we will be moving on to putting those in that second phase work plan with Jacobs. We've also engaged Jacobs to get some feedback from them on visitor center displays. We're asking them to go ahead and start getting some things mocked up and work with us on, details of those topics that we presented last time. So I would think, I don't think by our early January meeting that we'll have a mock-up ready. We could be checking in February. We'll just have to see how that, that work goes. There is quite a lot to do, but, we want to assure people that we still got that X on our forehead for those displays and are pushing forward with that. And then last piece of status to share with folks, that river operable unit work plan that we're gonna be talking tonight, that's been reviewed by regulators. It's also been reviewed by some tribes. We've gotten comments and are working through the resolution of those. And then tonight we're presenting an overview of that plan. It is in a draft form. So there could be some additional comments still to resolve. There still could be some additional changes from those comments. But we want to get this in front of the public so that folks have an idea of what's coming, as the sampling could start, or is planned to start early next year. Before we move into talking about that work plan specifically, are there any questions, comments on just other project status from the board?
I have 2 quick questions. For the visitor center displays, just wanted to confirm that Jacob's got all of the, when it says initial community feedback, does that include the recommendations?
Oh, yes.
Okay, great. And then the second question is, you said that the phase 1 river work plan was reviewed by tribes. Do you know which tribes reviewed it?
Rich, I'll ask you for some help on this. I know Yakima reviewed and submitted comments.
Reviewed, not sure, Andrew, I don't think Cowlitz reviewed. I wasn't the pass-through for a lot of comments, but I know Nation reviewed. I'm not sure about, Cowlitz or Brown.
Okay.
We were all, everyone that participates in the technical coordinating team meetings were briefed on it and received it, so. Some people or some organizations have capacity, some don't.
Sure.
So.
Okay, thank you.
Other comments, questions from the board? I'll open it up real quick to public. Are there any questions, comments from the public on the core status before we dive into work plan? Okay, great. I think the last slide that I have for folks is
Excuse me.
upcoming route.
Excuse me?
Go right ahead.
Sorry, I'm on my phone as well, so it's hard to hit the mute button, unmute button. This is Christy, but if someone can get me the contact of who you send the information to the Nez Perce tribe, I've been trying to get in contact with someone as well, of who is reviewing documents, or if they are. If someone could just forward me their point of contact with the Nez Perce tribe, that'd be great.
Oh, so who from the Nez Perce is participating on the technical coordination team then?
Yes. Yeah.
Sure, I can get you that information.
Okay. Thank you.
Anything else from, public or board members before we talk quickly, around meeting dates? All right, let's move right along. Our next RAB meeting dates are January 9th and February 13th. February, we'll be talking about, any additional, or will, that'll be the next date for, looking at any other applications. January, I'm not expecting to have a lot to bring, just to carve on the table. So is there any preference for these particular meetings, whether we do them in person, whether we do them, over Zoom? And another option we always have is the board can provide a written status via email and on the website. And ultimately up to the board members. Please go ahead.
This is Andrea. I won't be able to be at the January meeting either way. I'm going to be out on travel.
Thank you.
Otherwise, for me, it's Zoom.
I definitely think the January meeting could be a Zoom meeting, particularly because weather's really tricky in the gorge during that time.
Yeah.
And, it doesn't, it doesn't have to be 2 hours, it could just be, if we don't have a ton of stuff to cover, it can be based on the agenda, the timing.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think it needs to necessarily be the full 2 hours.
I think the only action item would have to be actually voting on the members, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Of course, we'll provide a status from the court, but there won't be a lot of changes between now and January 9th.
Yeah.
So voting on the members would be, the one piece of business.
Yeah.
Okay.
Assuming the panel wants them to move forward, so.
Right,
Yeah.
yeah.
Which we do, I'm
Yeah.
sure. I think that's fine to do on Zoom.
Okay.
Yeah.
From the board members online, any issues with doing January Zoom?
This is Christy. No, that's no problem.
Okay with me, Carl.
Okay. January Zoom only. Good point too about the road safety and stuff. It was very windy today. I'm glad it was dry.
Yeah.
Okay, unless there are other comments about anything we discussed so far, I would love to move right along to Bryce's technical presentation. Great. Go right ahead.
Okay, so hello, everybody. So I'm Jason Palmer. I'm actually with AECom. I'm one of Bryce's partners for this, or AECom is with this contract.
Yep, and I'm Corey Anderson with Bryce Engineering, so we're teamed together on this project, so.
Poor guy. All right, well, let's go ahead and jump into the presentation. If we can go to the next slide, please. As previously stated, this is a presentation on the upcoming phase 1 sampling event. We'll start off with just a very brief background on the site. I think most people in the room, and hopefully most everybody on the call, has a decent understanding of the site. So we'll provide just a quick background focused on sort of the sediment characterization, because that's the focus of phase 1. Talk a little bit about previous sampling work for sediments that we've done out there before. Talk just a tiny bit about the phased approach that we're going to use for the characterization to give you an understanding of what we're doing now versus what will come later. Talk about the specific, the proposed phase 1 sampling locations that are in the current work plan. Discuss the schedule for the field work that is estimated at this time. And then open it up for discussion with the group if there's any questions, topics folks would like to bring up. So with that, if we could go to the next slide, please. All right, ooh, that's really small. Okay, so just a quick overview on the site background. And actually, could you flip one slide forward really quick, and then we'll come backwards and we just get the figure up there to help. All right, so this kind of shows the Bradford Island site highlighted in the light blue in the middle is Bradford Island. That is the upland area of concern, or the upland operable unit, where most of the historical activities occurred. What we are talking about is the water surrounding Bradford Island, particularly on the north side of the island. So just to kind of bring folks to where we're at, you go back. So contamination within the river operable unit or the river OU exists primarily from outfalls from Bradford Island, surface water runoff, as well as historical waste disposal activities, including disposal of PCB containing electrical equipment and other solid debris that was deposited into the water adjacent to the shoreline. The remedial investigations to date have shown contamination in the sediments, in different types of biota, in the tissues of the biota, as well as some of the surface water that is right adjacent to the sediments. So there was some early investigation work, and then back in 2000, 2002, there was a removal effort where the debris that had been deposited in the river was removed. And then in 2007, a portion of that sediment was removed using diver-assisted dredging. Since that time, since 2007, there have been additional studies at the site, several of them, and they have confirmed that contamination is still present. So even though the debris was removed and some of the sediment was taken out, there still is contamination that is present in the sediments, as well as some of the fish, clams, and still in the surface water. So some of the sources were removed, but there still is some remaining contamination. And, you know, delineating that will be part of the discussion, this next step and part of the discussion that's upcoming. And then just as a reminder, EPA listed the Bradford site as a Superfund site back in 2002. So that's just a quick overview, kind of where we're at, or where we've been. If we want to go to the next slide, we can cover quickly some of the previous sampling locations. And sorry, this is a little smaller than I thought on the screen. But once again, so most of the sampling has occurred right adjacent to Bradford Island. Most of the sediment sampling, all those brownish dots along the north side of the island are previous sediment sampling results. As you can see, there are some along the Oregon shoreline, up by Eagle Creek and Goose Island. And then there's also been some sampling on the Washington shoreline and several miles upstream at some of the reference locations, which are locations that are supposed to be outside of the influence of the site itself. So what is background or reference that you can compare concentrations to the site to? Just I'll point out for the upland OU, which is in light blue, there's a couple of primary areas of concern or potential concern. In the red shading is the sandblast AOPC or sandblasting area, where sandblasting was done at the site, and there were some outfalls and surface water drainage that took possible contaminants into the river. In the yellow is the historical landfill area. The purple is the Pistol Range on the south side of the island. And you can't really see it, but along the north shoreline, in between the red and the yellow, is a little green area. That's what we call the bulb slope AOPC. So those are kind of the four primary source areas associated with the upland that had previously contributed contamination to the sediments. So, and I guess really what to focus on is just the area along the northern side of the island where we conducted historical sampling and how close it is in each shore. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide, please. All right, so the concept of a phased remediation or remedial investigation approach. So right now, we're planning on at least 2 phases of investigation work at the site. Phase 1, which we're talking about today, and phase 2, which will come after that and incorporate the results of the phase 1 sampling. And we're really doing this for a couple of reasons. Part of it is just the different contracts that the Corps has. The one with Bryce right now is more focused on the sediments. And then there's also a in-water work window, a limited time that we can actually go out and sample because of the operations of the spillway. When that spillway is open, we are not able to access large portions of the river area near the site. And so we felt it was best to break it up in order to take advantage of the in-water work windows. So the phase 1 investigation, which is currently planned for February, focuses primarily on surface sediments adjacent to Bradford Island. It's going to expand to surface sediments at Eagle Creek. And we're also going to be looking at hydrodynamic conditions within the river. So looking at water velocities, water flow directions, and sediment transport. The work plan right now is not final. I think as Megan said, it has been submitted for agency and tribal review. We've received feedback and we're currently addressing those comments. I think we're probably pretty close with what we have right now, but things might change slightly based on responses to comments and negotiations. So we are going to be collecting sediment samples for a pretty broad range of analyses. We'll be looking at PCB congeners, pesticides, pHs or polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, semi-volatile compounds, metals, mercury, total organic carbon. You can see the list up there on the slide. We are looking at a few other analyses as well. That discussion is going on with the agencies, and we hope to finalize that here shortly so we can get the work plan wrapped up. The next phase, at a minimum, will include the sampling of subsurface sediments. So right now, let's get in phase 1, we're only focusing on the surface. So we'll come back and we'll be looking at subsurface sediments, and we're going to expand that to other areas of the river OU. So the forebay, which is the area further out from Bradford Island, Goose Island, the south side of Bradford Island, and any other areas that are deemed necessary, primarily based on the results of the phase 1 work. So why don't we go to the next slide, please? All right, so let's start talking about the actual sampling itself. So the phase 1 sediment sampling. I think the biggest thing for us is the previous sediment sampling results never did delineate the outward extent of contamination from the Bradford Island shoreline. So that is one of the primary objectives of this, is to figure out, okay, well, how far out from Bradford Island does this contamination go? And so we're going to collect samples on transects that run outward from the island anywhere from 1 to 4 or 5 or 6 times as far as we've previously gone. So we're going to go quite a ways out into the river from the island to try and delineate the extent of impacts in the surface sediments. These transect locations, and I'll bring up a map shortly to show you them, are based on historical source areas, such as the debris piles that were previously removed, some of the outfalls, some of the areas where the riverbank has eroded into the sediments. And they also take into account previous sediment sampling results, various tissue results, the passive sampler results, from 2020, where there were elevated concentrations. So basically looking back at those areas of known contamination, targeting those and then extending the samples offshore of that to capture the extent of impacts. And then I guess the locations, the transects are sort of end at there's a shelf that I will show you in the next slide or two, where we're sort of ending the characterization. Is basically, the samples are based on the elevation present in the offshore area, which help give us an idea of where contamination might have come to be located based on contaminant transport means. Why don't we go to the next slide? And hopefully, almost to the picture. So just real quick, so the results will be used to evaluate the outward extent of contamination, as I said, also to help support development of the phase 2 work plan. So where we're going to be taking subsurface samples, for instance, those locations will be based on the results of at least partially based on the results of the phase 1 sampling. We'll be doing subsurface sampling anyways, but these may help us place some of those additional subsurface locations.
Wait, you said, let me get this straight. You said that the surface locations, the surface grab locations will be used to determine where the subsurface grabs?
To help determine, yes.
Help determine, okay.
Yes.
Well, I just want to make it clear that we said early on that you shouldn't base subsurface samples on the results of surface sampling, but they could be co-located with those samples.
Yeah, what we'd like to agree. It is a piece of information that we will use to help us.
Right.
Subsurface sampling will be conducted regardless of the surface sampling results. But whenever we're designing a work plan, we want to use all the information available to help us figure out where to sample.
Right, and I'll chime in here for those of you that aren't privy to the conversation. Really, usually these things happen where they would go out and you're going to see in these slides all these locations where they go and they take these subsurface samples, and they may not analyze all of those samples. And I think that's the clear distinction there, whether they sample versus analyze. And so there is a basis for them to analyze up to a certain point, and then when they start seeing non-detects, to archive those samples that are on the outermost edges that may not be contaminated, and then use those subsurface and plus the surface to try and gauge whether they should take step outs to analyze the ones that they have already archived. So that's generally what would be. So, just want to make that, just say that.
No, right. Always good to have clarification.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, so the sediment sampling in phase 1, surface sediments, they're gonna be performed by divers, deployed from a vessel. And they'll be from 0 to 6 inches or a half a foot in depth. And while the divers are out there, they'll also be going to use a probing rod to help evaluate the thickness of sediment that's present out there. This is another one of those things that might help us with looking at subsurface results. We need, if we can understand how much sediment is out there, there's no reason to try and put a sediment corn in a location with 2 inches of sediment. All right, why don't we go to the figure, the graphic, which will probably really help this discussion. All right, so these are the planned sediment sample transects coming off of Bradford Island. And the colors in this figure represent the bathymetry or the water depth. As measured, I think in September of last year by the Corps. And so where we focused initially is on what I would refer to as a shelf off of Bradford Island. The red areas are the most shallow, and the blue areas here are the deepest. And so we're taking it out to about the edge. You can see the shelf, kind of the greenish yellow area at the furthest extent of the transects as an area of, possibly from a physical perspective, the outward extent of the contamination. Once again, that will all be determined by the results, but it was a good place to start. Why don't we go ahead to the next graphic? And these show the same transects without the bathymetric survey data or the water depth elevations. But what this does show is all the little colored dots around the shoreline, those represent previous sediment sampling locations and their different concentrations. And so I think what this graphic is intended to show is just the distance outside of those previous locations that we are going to sample. So along the westernmost side, sorry, I had to think about that for a minute. We're going out, a little bit more than twice the distance. Whereas if you get more towards the eastern side of the island, we're going out 3, 4, 5 times further than we have before. So just to give you an idea of the aerial coverage or the extent of sampling relative to previous sediment sampling events. All right, let's just check the next slide. I think that's, yeah, okay, let's go back one, please. So that is a quick overview of the planned surface sediment sampling around Bradford Island. Before I move on to the next type of sampling, does anybody have any questions or comments on this part of the phase 1 work plan?
So, Rich Francis, I'll chime in here. If you notice these lines extending out from the shoreline, they go out into that shelf, you can see where those contour lines are. But if you look on the westernmost side of those transects, as well as just south of the easternmost transect, you'll notice that there are some locations where there are concentrations that were found of CCDs in articular form. So we don't think that this is going to laterally bound the contamination, but there will be more investigations closer to the spillway, as well as more investigations further south along the line. So I just want to make that clear to everybody. If you're seeing the same dots that I am, that have been discussed, I haven't found it.
That's very helpful. And just to be clear, is there any plans at all to do any testing downstream of the dam for sediment?
I have said, and I've maintained from the scientists that downstream is fair game. It needs to be investigated, and it will either be part of a different phase or it will be a completely new OU per sections in the federal facility agreement.
Yeah.
And trust me, I've already got the emails drafted. Once you
This is Jackie Frazier. That is part of what Jacobs is looking at for phase 2, that there will be some proposed downstream samples that'll be part of what we discuss as part of phase 2. So that is under consideration. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I think just a good overarching reminder, this is phase 1, right? This is not the end, but we are a little bit constrained on what we can do in this first phase. So we tried to focus in on the areas of known contamination closest to the source areas to get a better handle on that. There will be additional investigation.
Sorry, I just had one more question. How does this type of sampling compare to previous ways that sampling's been done in these areas before? Like I'm just curious, is it like, is this a standard way of doing sediment testing and that it's done that way before?
Yes.
Okay.
I'd say it's a little bit unconventional for sediment sites in the fact that we're using divers. But given the fact that this whole area is not covered with soft sediment that you can easily sample. And so we need to have divers go out there in order to make sure that we can get a representative sample. So I think that's probably the one conventional or unconventional part of this sampling event, but utilizing transects to basically step your way out to try and find the edge of the contamination is a very conventional way of doing this.
And then I imagine to be this subsurface sampling section that would include like investigating bedrock contamination as well, or is that part of that? Am I jumping ahead? Sorry.
Well, no, I just, it's something that has been discussed,
Uh-huh.
but I think something that just needs to be worked through as part of phase two, and so I don't wanna get ahead of ourselves.
Okay,
It's certainly something that's been discussed and is being looked at.
okay, thanks.
Okay, let's see here. Any other questions on the surface sampling before we move on? Going once, going twice. All right. Why don't we go ahead to the next slide, please? Okay, so, the second part of the, phase one sampling is looking at the riverbank soils. And so the historical practice of depositing materials from the uplands into the water, it may have left some contaminated soils or source materials right along the riverbank. And I guess for the purpose of the discussion, what we would call riverbank soils are those soils that are immediately adjacent to the water right along the shoreline. And so there's been no characterization of that, and so we would like to go out and characterize those riverbank soils. So right now, we are planning to do some shallow soil borings adjacent to the 3 debris piles that were in the river. Hopefully in line with some of our planned transects. The results will be used to evaluate really, is there an ongoing source, but also help confirm our conceptual site model of how the contamination came to be within the sediments. It will also help to support, decisions on potential upland remedies. So if there is impacted soils along the riverbank, those would need to be dealt with as part of remediation. So the sampling will be completed either from the shore or more likely probably from a vessel with a diver going to the shoreline. For those who haven't been out there, this is a very, very steep shoreline that's hard to access from the shore. So we'll probably have divers swim over from a vessel to take the cores. We'll be collecting those cores with a hand auger or hand tools down to about 3 feet in depth, and we'll analyze. We'll take 1 sample for every 1 foot of depth that we go down with the core. Next slide, please, if possible. So the pink lines on the map, there we go, show the areas where we plan to collect samples. So we plan to collect 1 sample off the bulb slope, which is the green area. And then debris piles, 1 and 2 are adjacent to the kind of the yellow blob there, the former landfill area. And we plan to collect 2 samples adjacent to each of those debris piles and 1 in the middle. The reason there are dots on the map and there's just kind of lines is we actually need to go out there and assess at the time where we can sample. Part of this is a health and safety thing for the people going out there. We actually have to find somewhere we can get to and safely collect a sample. We want to adjust as best possible so we can actually get soil to analyze. So we'll scout out the best locations to go collect those samples while we're out there in the field. And it really is because this is primarily only accessible by boat. And I believe that's it on the riverbank sampling. So before I move on, are there questions? Okay, I see you waving already.
Well, I was just wondering if there's gonna be any analysis of the actual cliff sides there on the landfill edge. To check, just to assess like wasting and erosion, not in water, but like, just, I don't know if the erosion on the cliffside has reached the landfill at this point, or if it's still got a ways to go, or if there's gonna be an assessment of that at all.
So this current scope only includes what's right next to the river, because really we're trying to evaluate, well, is there still an ongoing source? There could be visual observations made while we're out there of the of the full phase.
Mhm.
It's certainly something that would be considered as part of the upland evaluation is, does there need to be, stabilization of the bank? But for this particular phase, we're trying to get down right next to the water to understand, well, what is right there next to the water, and could it then enter the water and cause, additional contamination as part of, additional erosion or runoff when it's raining? So that's really the focus of this particular sample.
Jackie has a comment or a question, one or the other. Go ahead, Jackie.
Okay. No, Kate, that's a great question. We kind of had that discussion as well as kind of like that cutoff point where, even based on results, if it warrants something more, then we're kind of pulling that into our focus on the upland OU investigation versus the river OU investigation.
Got it, thank you.
Any other questions, comments on the riverbank sample?
Just before we move on, we do sometimes focus on our RAB member questions, but we're doing quite well on time. If community members, just folks attending in their own accord, if you have questions or comments, please feel free to jump in with those.
Okay, we'll give you one last shot at the end, just in case. All right, well, why don't we go to the next slide, please? All right, so the next piece of the phase one is utilizing sediment traps. So transport of contaminated sediments is one of the mechanisms for contamination to spread within the river. So you can move contaminated sediment from one area to another. And so we would like to utilize sediment traps to evaluate, well, what sort of sediment transport is occurring at the site. And before I keep talking through all these, maybe we go to the next slide. I should have rearranged pictures, but this just gives a feel for what a sediment trap is. So these are glass or polyethylene tubes attached to a device that just kind of holds them in place. They're filled with water. This is lowered to the bottom and secured to the sediment surface. And as if sediment is settling out of the water column, it would be collected within these sediment traps. It's something where you can measure how much sediment is deposited within the traps, and then you can sample that material to see if it is contaminated. So this is just kind of a what a sediment trap looks like.
Question, for reference, how tall is that?
2 feet? Maybe 3 feet, 3 feet? Tall, we have not put together the actual traps yet.
Oh.
So if we could go back one, this is just an example as a trap that was used at another site. So I think that might have been Portland Harbor.
Oh, yeah. We won't talk about Portland Harbor.
Okay, so I think I already talked about what a sediment trap is. So basically what we'll do is we'll secure those to the bottom, we'll leave them in place for a specified period of time. For the site, it'll be at least 90 days to allow sediment to accumulate within the traps. So then, once again, you can measure how much is accumulated and then submit that to the lab for analyses. So the results will be used to evaluate the quality of sediment that's being transported around key areas of the site and potentially support the evaluation of how much transport is occurring. So what is the quality of the sediment and how much is there? It will be used as just one line of evidence to evaluate potential different remedial technologies, be capping or something like monitored natural recovery. And this will also help validate our existing hydrodynamic model and the conceptual model for the site. The design rationale, so the traps will be deployed in varying conditions, so with the spillway open as well as the spillway closed. The reason that's important is because the water velocities, the direction the water is moving is very dependent on whether the spillway is open or closed, partially or fully. And so we want to collect data over all of the available scenarios. They'll be deployed by a diver and anchored to the bottom, so they remain in place. And as I said, they'll be deployed at least 90 days, in some instances longer, just based on where they are and when we can access them based on spillway closed or spillway open conditions. So if we go to the next slide, please. We've got, oh, that's the picture. We'll go one more. All right, so there's a couple things to point out in this graphic, and it's a little bit small, hopefully for those who are looking on the screens, they can zoom in if needed. But the little yellow dots are where we plan to deploy the sediment traps. The graphic showing the gray is basically, the gray is just the topography of the sediment bottom based on the bathymetric survey that I referenced earlier when we were talking about water elevations. The graphic in the upper right shows the same extent, the same locations, but it shows the results of the existing hydrodynamic model. And so you'll see there's little lines on there, those are arrows, which show the direction of water movements in this particular scenario, which is with the spillway closed. So which direction is the water moving? And the colors in that represent the velocity or how fast the water is moving. And so the blue, the darker blue means there's very little movement. And then as you ramp up to the greens, the yellows, and the reds, that is a faster water velocity. So what you'll see when the spillway is closed is you get a lot less water movement right up against the dam or the spillway. But then that water wraps around and comes around the tip of Bradford Island where it picks up velocity. And so we've positioned these sediment traps in areas that we would like to evaluate for different flow velocities in different areas. So these are the locations for the spillway closed. And the next slide.
Wait, before you go, oh no, I can go to the other slide too, it's fine, I can just do this.
Okay, and so these are just,
I think you're on that.
Oh, probably stupid question.
no,
Why is there not one in the middle of the river? Is it flow too fast for sediment to even settle?
well, generally speaking, in the middle, I would say yes, but some of these are out where I guess it's a very good question. I could have put this in the slide. Some of these are, especially along the southern shoreline, are outward facing current meter, or, oh wait, these are sediment traps, never mind.
Yeah.
I was getting ahead of myself, current meters. We are more trying to evaluate along the shoreline where we think sediment coming off of key source areas from the island might be potentially settling out. So these are actually targeted to look at sediments from specific areas. So as water comes from, say, goes by the spillway to the east along the shoreline, that's going to be moving over sediment that is contaminated. And then it wraps around the island and comes really along the south side of the island. I'll get up and point for those of you who are on the video call. Sorry, you probably can't see this, but along the southern side of the island where you have these lighter blue areas where sediment might wrap around the island and deposit, and we want to look and see if we can capture that. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, pretty much, yeah. It doesn't settle in the middle of the river, so yeah.
It really doesn't. The velocities are very high in the middle of the channel. Okay, we'll go to the next slide, and this is spillway open. So you see along the tip of the island, we put some sediment traps in areas where it's really dark blue to see if there is material settling out preferentially in those areas. And part of this is to help us validate the hydrodynamic model, where the model says deposition should be occurring. We're going to place sediment traps there to help validate that as well. You can see we also placed one over by the mouth of Eagle Creek to help us understand what's going on the other side of the main channel. Okay, so, Rich, I can see you over there smiling.
Well, you knew this was coming.
All I knew was coming, yeah.
Okay, so for everyone that's looking at the graphic here in the upper right-hand corner, you can see the color gradation between blue and red, right? And, you know, in an earlier slide, you said that part of phase one is to determine grain size, distribution, specific gravity and things like that. So my question, and I probably know the answer is, do you know the shear velocity of this river system right here?
Not off the top of my head.
Okay.
However, based on, there's some pretty standard graphs that will give you velocity versus grain size for shear.
Right. So, you know, for those of you that may not know, shear velocity is the velocity at which point you get an erosion versus depositional, right? It overcomes the frictional force of the particulates or the grains, the sediment, based on the shape of the sediment, the size, distribution, things like that, and the normal force of the water acting down on it, right? Friction force. So shear velocity is that point at which it starts moving that sediment. And it would be helpful during these graphics if we knew that, and we could just, you know, at some point, because, you know, it's going from blue to red. What does the yellow mean? What does the red mean? What is, you know, are we looking at indications of deposition versus erosion on these graphs? And I think that would probably be a lot more helpful in the future. Like I said, phase one, they're gonna determine grain size and distribution and specific gravity, things like that. So should be able to come up with a pretty sound on that.
Yeah, once we have that information, it's certainly something that if we map out the sediment types, then you can look at a corresponding velocity at which you would start to have resuspension or shear of those sediments. Rich, any other thoughts?
No.
Okay, all right. Okay, and I will say, this is one line of evidence for the broader conceptual side model. All right, any questions from others in the group, members of the public?
How close to Goose Island are you getting with your sediment trucks?
Well, I have to look at the scale here, probably at least 1,000 feet away. We are not actually placing traps at Goose Island, but we did place, if you see at the mouth of Eagle Creek, we did place a location down there that will be looking at sediment transport on that side of, that side of the river. And part of that will get to the concerns about Eagle Creek, in about 4 slides, but that's one of the reasons we put the sample there, is to look at, well, is there anything coming down on that side of the river? And could something be coming, say, from Goose Island or Eagle Creek?
And theoretically, that one would be, that one by Eagle Creek would be sufficient to catch that? And I don't know, like, if the folks listening know that, like, Goose Island is not a naturally formed island, it's the dredge spoils from the southern side of Bradford Island, right?
Yes.
So I think that's why there might be more of a concern for some contamination up at Goose Island, so that's why I'm asking the questions.
And I would say it's reasonable to think it could, but that's also why we're planning some sediment sampling as well, because once again, I mean, these are not a definitive, sediment within a river can come from a lot of places.
Right.
So this is not a definitive answer, and that's why we want to combine it with other sampling, like the surface sampling. We'll talk about it in a few slides, and then I think maybe probably some of the sampling in phase 2. But this is a good, a helpful line of evidence. All right, I am not hearing any other questions, so why don't we, check, we're doing good, why don't we go ahead and move on? All right, so current meters. you know, we've just been talking about water movement and contaminant transport, sediment transport. And one of the ways you evaluate that is evaluating how the water is moving through the site or around the site. And right now we have a model to help us evaluate that, but there hasn't actually been any site-specific data collected to help us validate that model. And so we are proposing to put out current meters around the site to help us measure the velocity at which the water is moving and the direction that it is moving to help us validate the model. So we'll look at the model, what should be happening according to the model, and then we can look at actual data to see, well, is the model predicting what is actually happening? So it's a way to validate the results of the model. The meters will be placed in key areas around the river to help us validate the model, but they are also placed to help us evaluate key areas around the site to help us evaluate, say, future remedial actions. So we are going to want to know how fast water is moving around areas where we might be dredging or where we might be capping to understand how to engineer those remedial technologies. So I think I covered most of this as from how the data will be used, validate the model, line of evidence to evaluate different remedial technologies. We are also co-locating some of the meters with sediment traps. So we can look at, all right, what is the material that we see within the sediment traps? How much is there in there? And then what are the water velocities during that time to help us understand why that sediment is in there as well. So several of them are co-located, and you'll see those locations in the next graphic. For the design rationale, we're going to be measuring currents at the tip of Bradford Island, the north side of Bradford Island, a little bit on the south side. So once again, primarily focused around Bradford Island, but we feel like that's where, you know, the source of contamination is. That's where we want to focus this particular effort. As with the sediment traps, we're going to be measuring both during spillway open and spillway closed conditions, so we can validate the model under various scenarios. These will be deployed 30 days, which is about when their battery runs out. So that's kind of the limitation of an individual deployment for the meters. Why don't we go ahead and move on to the next slide if you could, so we can. Do you need to go back to the last?
No, I don't need to go back, but I did just have a question about trying to understand the model you're using and the data that you use to inform that model. Is it, and I don't even know if this is relevant, but is it encompassing enough to accommodate for the decades of flow that's happened over time with this contamination? So like, you know, we've had multiple decades where the contamination has been present, and I don't know if the flow, the current, you know, like the dam usage has been different over time, or, you know, when dredging has happened, if it changes things. I don't know enough to know about it, but I'm just wondering if you think the model is informed enough to kind of account for the historical currents, or, yeah, does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I'm gonna speak a little bit in generalities here because I didn't actually work on this model.
Okay.
But generally speaking, models use site-specific data and what we call boundary conditions as input. So we'll look at the amount of flow coming into a system, the amount of flow exiting the system, and then you look at the physical conditions. So the topography, the bathymetry, the water depth, and those are the input parameters that the model uses to create where it thinks the water should be going and why.
Mm-hmm.
And so from a historical perspective, there are historical records that could look at how much water was coming in and how much water was going out. We will not have we don't have historical site-specific data like current meters, but we do have historical inflow and outflow. We do have, I think, to an extent, historical bathymetric data, although it's probably not as granular or as accurate as some of the more recent data, only because technology has improved over time. So yes, I think it does. I think the degree of accuracy varies, but I think for the question you were asking, I think the answer would be yes, I think we have enough. But as with any model and historical data, there is some uncertainty.
Yeah, I would say this is, exactly a line of evidence. So you would look at bathymetric surveys and things like that to see the sediment that's moving in and moving out. But it doesn't answer what's happening downstream, if that's kind of where you were going. And we would expect to see a study very similar, if not just like this, for the downstream areas that opens up. As a line of evidence to see if there is sediment flowing through the spillways, where that might end up, depositing down.
Okay. That's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, and I would just say the other thing you can look at is just general morphological conditions. Where you would typically see erosion, where you would typically see deposition. When a river widens, the water typically slows down. And so you typically have more deposition or sediment falling out in those areas. When a river is restricted, velocities increase, and so you would tend to see faster velocities. You see certain conditions on the inside or the outside of different bends. So there's definitely, just aside from the model and even the site-specific data, there's information you can draw from physical conditions to help you evaluate the data and the model as well. And Rich, you're absolutely right. This is a line of evidence that we're using along with several others to inform the conceptual side. All right, why don't we go ahead? So I think I just threw up a couple. These are examples of current meters, and they've got the little transducers, the little red windows on the outside that the beams pass through that measure what's flowing by them. And that's just an example on the right side of a stand that we might attach a current meter to and anchor it in place, just to give people an idea of what these look like. Next slide, please. So these are in purple, the location of the current meters. This is during spillway closed conditions. And you'll see some of these locations have arrows pointing out into further out in the river. These are side mounted current meters. So some of the current meters will measure, what a current meter does is you place the meter and you aim it in a specific direction, and it measures everything that comes in contact with that beam outward of it. So an upward facing current meter will measure the velocity and direction above that meter. And you typically set it up to measure in, say, 1 foot increments. So if you have 40 feet of water above that meter, you would get information for 40 1-foot intervals above the meter. And so it allows you to calibrate the model at different water depths throughout the model. So when you have a 3D model, that's important because currents can vary from the surface of the water to deeper down in the water column. You could also turn those sideways and have those measure outward. And so this helps us get more coverage to evaluate the validity of the model. So this is spillway open or spillway closed. We go to spillway open conditions. Again, you'll see several of those, like the one over by Eagle Creek is co-located with the sediment trap, so we can understand what's going on with the sediment trap, what were the water velocities like at that time. Any questions on current meter placement? No? Okay. All right, why don't we move on to, I believe it's Eagle Creek. Yes. So sediment sampling at Eagle Creek. So in addition to our focus on Bradford Island, we're going to be looking at least surface sediments over at Eagle Creek. And this is because some previous sediment samples, surface sediment samples, did detect some higher PCB concentrations at the mouth of Eagle Creek. And so we would like to investigate that and try and figure out, well, where did that come from? Because it is across the main flow of the river channel. So we'd like to understand, well, is that something that could have come from Bradford Island? Is it something that could have come from Goose Island, which Kate, you brought up earlier? Maybe we can switch to the next real quick. So Goose Island, you can see, I guess in the upper left-hand corner, you see Eagle Creek coming out. It kind of wraps around to the right. And you can see Goose Island there at the top. And as Kate brought up, that was built with materials removed from the sort of the eastern southern side of Bradford Island. So there is a question of whether or not the materials used at Bradford Island were impacted or contaminated. So we are taking these samples, were designed to evaluate, well, did those PCBs come from Eagle Creek itself? Could there have been a source up there? So we've got some samples that go up the creek. There are also samples that wrap around the shoreline and go upstream towards Goose Island. So we've got a couple samples in between there to see, well, is there something along the Oregon shoreline there that suggests a potential source like Goose Island? And so that's really what these samples are intended to accomplish. Once again, these are only surface samples. There will be subsurface samples collected, just not as part of this phase. If you wanna maybe pop back to the previous slide and see if there's anything, oops.
All right.
Perfect, thank you. I think we really covered all this other than, you know, the samples will be collected by a vessel or people waiting to the sample locations. It just depends on the water depth, especially at the time. People might have to wait in, we might not be able to get a vessel, especially those samples up further in Eagle Creek. They will be 0 to 6 inches or half a foot sample depth, just like those off of Bradford Island. These also will be another line of evidence to helping us evaluate the conceptual site model, the hydrodynamic model. If we see a signature that suggests these are from, the PCBs are from Bradford Island, that would help us evaluate the site conceptual model. How would that material have gone over? All right, we can pop forward to the picture, the graphic again real quick, and I'll ask if anybody has questions or comments on the sampling at Eagle Creek.
Just gonna add a little quick piece, because we talked about Goose Island a couple times there. Phase 2 is planning to do sampling at Goose Island.
And refresh my memory, those dots, the pre-RI sediment, RI sediment, 2008 and 2009. Were all of those contaminated with PCBs? Were there some non-detects in those samples?
I believe there was only one location, at least at Eagle Creek right there, that had elevated levels of concern. Higher concentrations. There were some detections in those other samples, but there was one sample in particular right there at the mouth. I want to say it was P43, which is right in the mouth, that had the levels of concern. There certainly were some non-detects, there were some detections though, but they were lower.
Thank you.
All good. Okay.
I don't know if we're done with you yet, but I will thank you.
Done with me?
Not till we're picking our teeth with your bones.
First time. Okay, why don't we go ahead to the next slide? I think there's maybe just, yeah, schedule. So, in the, winter, spring, February timeframe, we plan to go out and do, the sediment sampling, all of the surface sediment sampling, for Bradford Island as well as Eagle Creek. We will be deploying sediment traps and deploying current meters. And then we will go back a couple times in the spring to retrieve the current meters 30 days after we install them. We'll go ahead and retrieve some sediment traps this summer, and then we'll redeploy the sediment traps and the current meters for their second deployment after the spillway closes. So we'll have spillway open conditions, we'll have spillway closed conditions. All right, next slide. I think this is would anybody else like to pick on Jason's slide? So we've gone over a lot. We went over some of it kind of quickly. I know folks were able to speak up with some questions, but has anybody been sitting on a comment, anything that they thought of during the rest of the presentation, questions that folks would like to bring up, additional discussions? Yes, Mitch.
So I'm wondering, on the contamination, when do we know that it started? And then also, was there any contamination from the second powerhouse when they created it and built it?
Okay.
That's a deep cut. I'm gonna go back to what I remember. We also have our program manager online, who probably has a little bit finer memory than I do on this. Cause she's just smarter than I am. But, contamination, I believe, started as early as the 40s when the first powerhouse was being built. There were multiple different sources of contamination. We talked about the landfill. There was actually a landfill used on Bradford Island at that northeast tip. Balsuk, where there were, like mercury bulbs were, disposed of in that area. Sandblast grit was literal like metal sandblast bits that were, disposed of on the island. And the pistol range was an area where, there was like, as it said, a literal pistol range. There were, casings and shells left, things like that. I believe contamination continued into, Richard Jackie might have to help me with this. I want to say 60s or 70s contamination, continued in some of the areas, but not all of them.
I think, was it over like around 40 years or more than it?
Right, it was 30, 40 years, so it wasn't, I think, yeah. Well, I will say this, that, EPA has maintained that, the contamination around the eastern portion of Bradford Island is not, in our view, everything. There is obviously Goose Island, which I will continue to talk about. But the operations of Bonneville Power Administration, or the entity that was there before Bonneville Power Administration, exactly what you're saying, the construction of Powerhouse 2, other islands, Robbins Islands, things like that, where there may be some contamination. The original, and the original plan that was brought to the regulators for this phase 1 had sampling coming off of Cascade Islands. But we didn't feel that that we wanted to hone in kind of on, for this phase 1, we wanted to hone in on Bradford Island and leave the investigations of the other islands for a different phase. So we could get a good robust sampling event done right off the bat for a specific area, right? Instead of saying, well, we're gonna go grab some from Cascade Islands, and then next year for the next season, we're gonna grab some more. And then that kind of creates a disparity between, older and newer data. And given the dynamics of the river, it may be different from one year to another. So those areas are very much on the table for us, and as well as downstream freestyle and things like that.
Because I don't know how much truth there is to any of this or not, but I've always been told that big hump at North Bonneville has got a bunch of contamination underneath of it from the second powerhouse. And then also that during that construction of the second powerhouse, when they relocated North Bonneville, that a lot of that stuff from the Bradford Island went down, and it's actually underneath of the town of North Bonneville when they graded to put the new town and city in. So how much truth there is to that, I don't know. The big hump in North Bonneville that's still on Army Corps ground, my guess is yes, there's something underneath of that. I would almost bet everything I own on it.
Yeah, well, that's kind of the nature of Superfund, right? RCRA, Resource Conservation Recovery Act, Clean Water Act, all these other acts are meant to be in place in case there's an event, right? You know, everything's great, everything's copacetic until some release happens, right? But with super fun, the releases happened decades ago, a generation ago or two. So being able to go, yeah, that's definitely where something spilled, we don't know that, we're just loads and loads of uncertainty. So if somebody from the community knows something, you know, that's
honest truth.
But sometimes a concerned community member or somebody that might have just or a community that knows, right? They know that's something, right? That can be a valid concern and something that we would look at. At the very least, we would poke some holes in that hill or, it's something, right? Because you don't know.
It's odd that it's there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was placed there.
Hey, this is Carl. Thank you for the presentation. That was very informative. I have to duck out now. I've got another appointment, but I appreciate learning more about your plans.
Well, Carl, happy to do the presentation and thanks for joining.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Carl.
But to answer your concern, everything is pretty much on the table for us right now. We have not defined the boundary of Bradford Island as a Superfund site because we have really not determined the nature and extent of contamination and something that happened in the 40s and 50s. You know, we don't know until we know, right?
Yeah.
But under CERCLA, I have to assume that you're right. Or that what you would present as a concerned community member has validity to it.
I think there's probably something there.
I did want to add a couple comments on what Rich said as well. So first off, we do have some additional information on the website for historical stuff that I can send on to you.
Okay.
It's available for those online. It's available on the Bradford Island website. And we can include that link into the minutes. But it's always there, a quick Google search away. But also, I did want to mention too, we talk about the federal facility agreement a lot in here. And so a relevant piece of that is there is language on how to propose and add new offerable units. So that's a big place that kind of discusses that. It's still an open piece, even with it being unsigned, there's still.
Yeah, I alluded to that earlier with unsent emails, that there are provisions in the FFA to open up new user to have investigations. So, yeah, the concerned citizens is valid as far as I'm concerned.
That's fine. Great. So, thank you. That's why we're here.
Yeah.
And I would reach out to Washington Department of Ecology, because you said it was North Bonneville, right? So that's Washington side.
Yeah.
If maybe they might be online. I'm not online, so I don't know if maybe Department of Ecology is on or might have some historical knowledge of the area. Oh, well, Mike's Oregon.
All right, well.
Can we go back one slide to schedule? I want to get a quick note. So we talked about February as this winter, spring timeframe. I just want to add, that is definitely contingent upon making sure we have regulator comments completely incorporated and that regulators have their agreement on this work plan.
That helps, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we do need that.
Rich, you got a pen here, right?
What's that?
You got a pen here, you can
I can just sign it. Left my rubber stamp in the car. No, I will say that this work plan, it's pretty limited, granted, you said as much, but it has been providing a good opportunity for us to kind of grow a little bit as a technical coordinating team, as regulators and inviting the tribes in and things like that. And we are going through a bit of growing pains and, we're still, finding our grooves, but I would say that this has provided a good opportunity for us to all come together and work through it and do the work. So I'm appreciative of Army Corps of Engineers, pushing this through. It's, very limited and there's gonna be a phase 2, but it helps us kind of set the tone for the work going forward. And I am appreciative of them participating in the TCT, and bringing these documents and taking our comments into consideration. And you can tell, I mean, you probably people here didn't see the original draft, but it is changed based on the TCT comments and concerns. So, and I would invite anybody that, may be part of the TCT to that's online and watching to chime in and say your feelings as well too. So, I don't want to speak for everybody at the TCT, but appreciate it.
The only comment in the chat was actually from Mike Polson. He added that Hamilton Island was a federal Superfund site.
Hamilton Island's over on the western side, right? Just downstream of Bradford Island.
Okay. Well, I think that wraps up the presentation. Thanks for putting up with me for probably a full hour of talking. Turn it back over to Megan.
All right, thanks so much. Appreciate the presentation here and all. We have just a few minutes left, so I'll open it up for other comments, questions for the end of the meeting.
Surprise. So I just wanted to get some clarity. At the very end of the last meeting, Laura brought up the fish tracking study that we all just became aware of. I guess what I'm wondering is, I was a little baffled that the study results were released and none of the parties involved in the Superfund site cleanup were notified about it. So I'm wondering, what are the protocols when studies are done or being, proposed that are related to the Superfund work, like the data would be related? Like, what's the protocol for the parties involved in that cleanup being notified? And I guess because, is it on us to be like constantly looking for study results, or is there a protocol where it's like, this is the relevant study that was done, and we're gonna make it, rather than just quietly release the results, we're gonna make sure that the involved parties are aware of the results? And I guess following up on that, just, are there any other, do we know of any other relevant tissue sampling studies or any other studies that have been done, are in process, or are planned? Just so that we can all be aware of that information that might be out there.
Yeah.
And I think for public trust too, it's just like, really important to be, transparent about all of that.
Right. Yeah, so for the USGS study, one thing that I had not been tracking in my personal position was that was something that the Corps had funded. And so when that study came out, for me, it was, oh, the USGS released a study. That's very interesting. From the Corps, anything that we would release as a study, related to Bradford Island, yes, it would be, the plan would be notification of, our partners, regulators. But for USGS, in terms of when that was released, definitely, that was not, the release of it, like the dates and stuff, that was not something coordinated. So it's really hard to speak on that. We don't have any other current planned studies that we don't have any other studies that we're planning with USGS or other partners. And particularly none that we have plans that we're funding.
So, the USGS fish tracking study, did you have a chance to look at it?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah, it's a very interesting study. It has not been posted to the Bradford Island Administrative Record, correct?
I believe that is correct, yeah.
Right, I'll check it out, but, so, you know, the administrative record is very specific to the documents that contribute to a decision out of the site. So if this was released by USGS and not posted to the administrative record, then it is assumed that it's not being considered, for written decisions. So it's an interesting bit of information. We talked it out with Oregon Health Authority, to see if it would impact their fish advisory. They said it would not. They generally, and I don't want to speak too much for Oregon Health Authority, if you're here, feel free to chime in. But they were very much looking for, actual empirical fish tissue data to inform their advisories. And so if they were to expand the fish advisory, say downstream based on, contaminated fish tissue, then that would be, if we were to do it through this process, it would be part of the investigation of the downstream area. So it would follow that CERCLA process of opening up the new OU, or doing the phase 2 study, determining that there is contamination and sediment down there, and then doing fish tissue study to get a baseline of what's out there. And then that information gets sent to the Oregon Health Authority for them to either to do with whatever they will. You know, we're not really here to put our thumbs on the scale of what OHA does, but fish advisory. EPA wants to protect, so we would probably say there needs to be a fish advisory all over the whole river, but that would be part of that process. So, yeah.
So Dana is on.
Oh, thanks, Dan.
Thanks, Rich. She said, we are recommending additional fish sampling to inform changing the boundaries of the current advisory.
Right.
Yeah, that sounds like a really good recommendation.
And I have did you have a follow-up on the request from last time for USGS presentation? I've been in touch with the author over at USGS, and I've actually looped in Dana as well to some of that discussion.
Right.
Right now, the earliest they could present, I believe, is February. So we're still working on when we can bring them in to do that, but yeah, those talks are in the works.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah, other comments, questions?
Christy has a question. Her question is, do you see any tribal risk assessments? Or do you use any tribal risk assessments in that focus?
I think I would have to take that question away and look into that.
Well, I know that the ASTDR study for the site took tribal consumption rates into account and used those as their basis for the site risk evaluation that they were doing in partnership with OHA.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and actually that's a good clarification. In your question, Christy, are you specifically referring to CERCLA activities that the Corps is performing, or is this in reference to USGS study or OHA fish advisory? Or maybe all?
She said super fun.
Okay, yeah, I'll have to take that question away.
I can say though that having the tribes present at the TCT will certainly make that an item, right, to consider. So I'm really appreciative of our tribes for participating in the TCT and giving their input. There are a lot of smart people that work with them, and I'm grateful to have them.
Yes, it's been extremely valuable for them. Any other comments in chat?
Dana just posted, also wanting to note all the fish advisory materials are now available online. And we'll make a note of the link and we'll put it in the notes.
Thank you, Dana.
Christy was asking, who is that group? And I can get those contacts. I'm not sure if she's referring to the TCT or I think that.
I CC'd you on the email that I sent to Christy with the point of contact for the NESPERS.
Okay, thank you.
We are currently at 7:01. I'm not hearing any other questions or comments. Is there a motion to close the meeting?
All motion. Andrea.
Okay, we have a motion and second. That closes our meeting. Thank you all very much. We will be on Zoom for January 9th. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Good night, all.
Yeah.
Okay.